Welcome back, YouTube. It is the Drunk Capitalist here today, and I have another video for you guys. I want to have an important discussion. It's something that's been on my mind for a little bit, but now it's getting more and more concerning. So this is about American people, right? This is about the situation we're going to find ourselves in the coming months. I'm saying 6 months to a year. It may last a long time. So of course you already heard inflation, interest rates rising, this and that. But a lot of people aren't paying attention to what that really means for us, the people, the consumers, the workers, the workforce, everyone, the business owners, small business and large, everyone involved. Now, this has been a long time coming. As we already know, our economy is cyclical, right? So around every decade, we have a peak and a trough, right? Things go high and then they go low, and we kind of go like this, right? We go like this. Everyone loves when we're up here, and everyone acts super shocked when we get down here. I don't know why. I fully expect us to continue on this wave. But the problem is, as people try to avoid or recreate policies that try to avoid this downturn, we end up in situations where this lasts so long that this becomes ever increasingly more devastating. Now, prior to March 2020, I was preparing myself for a downturn. I didn't know when it was going to happen, and I had no idea it was going to be the Black Swan event that it was. It just so happened that that event occurred, but I fully was preparing myself personally for an economic downturn because it had already been a decade since the last downturn. So we were due, right? So then March 2020 happened, and slowly but surely, well, not slowly, but quickly, let's say quickly and surely, unemployment rose over 13%. But because it was a Black Swan event, right, people were able to ignore the consistent situation that we have in our economy of peaks and low levels of economic movement, right? So because we were able to ignore the normal things that happen, people continue to ignore that sign that it doesn't matter if a Black Swan event happens and unemployment spikes. The economy itself still needs to rebalance and even things out, right? So people thought that that was the great reckoning and equilibrium creation of whatever was in their mind. They thought that, okay, well, it went down a lot, so it's only up from here. Not quite. There are a lot of things, a lot of moving parts in our economy. We cannot ignore that. We cannot act like just because a Black Swan event like a global health epidemic happens that all of a sudden all the other factors of business and the economy don't still apply. They still apply, and they're going to come regardless of whether you like it or not. And here today, we have Jerome Powell being questioned by Congress and, well, the Senate, and we're seeing that, hey, things are really not going back to what they were in 2018 and 2016. I think 2016 was like a really, really high because everybody was making money. Money was flowing everywhere. And because of that, the interest was already low. And since the interest was already low, when we had our Black Swan event, we had no choice but to put interest down even lower in order to save the economy. Now, it's my opinion that because of the fact that I was already preparing for the economy to slide downwards at that time before the Black Swan event, I feel like we should not have printed any money. But I was saying that at a time when even I was facing difficulties. Because at the end of the day, fundamentally, I understand that if we don't take the hit now, it's gonna hurt way more later. The higher you go, the higher you can fall, right? And that is going to be devastating. So, in my opinion, I felt like we should have let it correct itself as though it was a natural correction instead of a black swan event. We should have let it correct itself. But instead, we lowered interest rates and allowed more money to flow into the economy. And one thing we know for certain is that the money flows from the economy starting at the Fed, it goes to the banks, and then to businesses. Yes, you can go direct to the bank and get a mortgage or something like that, but for the most part, it goes bank, the Federal Reserve Bank, to our commercial banks, and then to the businesses, and then it kind of, the debt itself trickles down while the profits obviously trickle upwards. And that happens because we continuously print money. It's as simple as that. If we stop printing money, maybe Reagan's trickle down economics would actually come into fruition. But as long as we continue printing money, that's never going to happen. Like, we left the gold standard. I'm going to go on a rant at this point, but let's get back to the point. So we have Jerome Powell, and he's talking to Congress, and I think that because people are so distracted with things like social media, their own personal lives and things like that, a lot of people don't watch these really, really important events. It's not like back in the day where when the politicians are talking, everyone is listening or reading the newspaper or what have you. Most people watch the news, and the news ain't even really news. We're talking about a young basketball player, Ja Morant, having a weapon in one of his social media videos. That's not news. What qualifies as news is Americans seem to be getting, unalived in Mexico on a consistent basis. That's news. Monetary policy, that's news. Deciding that we're gonna go to some type of war, that's news. Kim Kardashian building a playground for her kids, that's not news. That's her personal business. But somehow we made that news, and that's just not news at all. But before I keep ranting and raving about it, I want to get into this first video. So now this is Jerome Powell being questioned with John Kennedy, and I think this clip is first because y'all need to understand what it really means when we go so high and we have to continue our wave. We have to come back at some point, and Jerome is going to try to explain what he needs to do in order to get us back to a place where inflation isn't running away.
Chairman Powell, thank you for being here. Thank you to you and your team for helping to save the economy during the pandemic meltdown.
He literally said, thank you for saving the economy during the pandemic meltdown. What he really means to say is, thank you for printing trillions and lining the pockets of me and my constituents.
It's worth, I'm generally supportive of the actions of the Fed right now, and I'm
generally supportive of you printing money and increasing rates. I'm generally supportive of you printing money and increasing rates, so now the people that finally do have money in their hands can't afford to buy anything.
Anybody. When Congress spends money, it stimulates the economy, does it not?
Well, it would depend on whether that's funded by tax increases or not. But so if there's a spending that's not accompanied by taxes, would have a net at the margin stimulative effect.
Well, and when Congress borrows money to spend even more, that stimulates the economy even more, does it not?
At the margin, yeah.
Okay.
So let's just be clear what they're talking about. When they say Congress spending money, meaning our representatives coming together, creating a fiscal year plan, having a budget for what they're going to spend on, which for whatever reason, we always end up spending like the most money on military. I don't understand how many bullets you could possibly need, but I'm not part of any wars, so I don't understand that side of things. But I see that they consistently cut social services whenever there needs to be some cutting or cost savings measures, is always at the social service levels. But he's talking about spending and how that affects inflation and most importantly, stimulus. So them spending money stimulates the economy. Yes, because governments pay for certain things, they stimulate other businesses or government contractor businesses that, you know, get contracted by the government to operate and do whatever it is that they do. And then obviously when it comes down to social services, where the government spends money keeping people alive, such as food stamps, Section 8 housing, and what have you, but that goes down to the state level. But obviously the federal government creates those budgets and gives it to each state based on like population size, hand washing, and the like. But Congress has another problem. So the difference is you're either getting money from tax, meaning you're taxing the people, and you're taking money from them to create the stimulus, or, which means you're recycling the money, right? Or you're taxing them, using that money, and then also borrowing money outside and creating new money. So now the money that they do have left over isn't actually worth as much. But I'm gonna try to contain myself.
If Congress reduced the rate of growth in its spending and reduced the rate of growth in its debt accumulation, it would make your job easier in reducing inflation, would it not?
I don't think fiscal policy right now is a big factor driving inflation at this moment, but it's absolutely essential that we do slow the pace of growth, particularly for the areas of the budget.
All right, let's try to unpack this then. I'm not trying.
That to me doesn't add up, but maybe I'm just not as smart as the people in the room. But I don't know how you can say fiscal spending doesn't have anything to do with it when literally right now we are contending with raising the debt ceiling, and the only way to raise the debt ceiling is to get Jerome Powell to give us more debt through the government. So I'm already confused when he says, hey, it doesn't, maybe not. Like, I don't know.
Tricky. You're raising interest rates. You're raising interest rates to slow the economy, are you not?
Yes, to cool the economy off.
And one of the ways you measure your success, other than fluctuation in gross domestic product, is the unemployment rate. Is it not?
Yes, one of the measures.
Okay. So in effect, I'm not being critical. When you're slowing the economy, you're trying to put people out of work. That's your job, is it not?
Not really. We're trying to restore price stability.
No, you're trying to raise
not wages.
You're trying to raise the unemployment rate.
There are a lot of
that mean I know you don't like the phrase, so let me strike it. You're trying to.
So I think on Jerome Powell's side, he's saying, hey, I'm not trying to make people unemployed. I'm trying to raise the interest rates so people stop buying things. And if the demand slows, meaning people stop buying and wanting things, then prices have no choice but to come down to a more affordable level so people can buy those things. That is the option. Now, what happens though is that because people, if the interest rates are high and people can't borrow to buy things, and then they don't buy those things, then the businesses don't make the profit that they need, and then they close. What happens when a business closes? People become unemployed, and that is the obvious end result in all of this. He's not saying that directly. He's saying, well, I'm just raising interest rates so that people can stop spending. I don't want nobody to lose their job, but obviously the result is possibly you losing your job.
Raise the unemployment rate, are you not?
No, we're not trying to raise it. We're trying to realign supply and demand, which could happen through a bunch of channels. Like,
exactly.
For example, just job openings.
All right,
job openings.
Let me put it another way, okay? The
He's like, I'm not
Economist
taking that.
did a wonderful study. They looked at 10 disinflationary periods in America going all the way back to the 1950s. Disinflation is what you're trying to do. It's a slowing in the rate of inflation. Am I right?
Yes.
In other words, prices don't go down, they just don't go up as fast. Deflation is when prices actually go down. You're trying to achieve disinflation, are you not?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Based on history, in the 10 times that we got inflation down, disinflation since the 1950s, in order to reduce inflation by 2%, unemployment had to go up 3.6%.
So back to what I was saying about the deflation, because we're making a distinction here of deflation, disinflation, and inflation. Inflation being prices increasing, disinflation meaning slowing the increase, and deflation meaning lowering the price. Now, the reason I said deflation before is because it's almost impossible to control disinflation. But we see it because most things that we've purchased in the past never come down after they've been inflated whenever we've gone through an inflationary period, if that makes sense. So for example, I guess back in the day, bread used to cost 50 cents. Now a loaf of bread costs $4. Will bread ever go back to 50 cents? Probably not. All they can really do is create disinflation. And the real reason for that is because we have large businesses that never want to log a smaller profit than they need year over year. That's really what it is. If a company logs a profit that's shorter than last year over year, they look at that as losing. Like, and I just don't agree with that. Even as a capitalist, I don't agree with that. I believe in making profit, but it doesn't need to increase year over year. If you make the same profit for this 10 straight years, you still won. You won the game. You're winning, and you're consistently winning. You're shooting three at the 3-point line consistently. You're fine. But they're trying to shoot full court shots over and over and over again and keep backing up further and further away from the court and making large shots. And it's like, at a certain point, you're going to be outside the stadium trying to make it into a small hoop. It's going to be impossible. Like, okay? That's how I see the whole thing. And it to me, it's not understanding that the people themselves, us as the consumers, play a huge role. Also, there's a lot of other moving parts to the system, but we also play a role in how we spend. We fuel inflation because we are the demand. We are the consumers. Companies can make products until they're blue in the face, but if we don't want them, the company closes. Done. End of story. There's nothing else to it. But if we allow ourselves to be tricked out of our bag and continuously buy things at ever increasing rates of inflation, then they have no real reason to stop moving the goalpost, because at the end of the day, they're just trying to make that 3-point shot. They don't care. Like, they don't care. So we have to be the first ones to step in. And because of the Black Swan event, and then the Fed stimulating the economy and giving us so much money, a lot of people just went out and just did whatever. And now we're all really having to face, like, okay, what's in front of us? Some people are seeing what's in front of us. Some people are still digging in their pockets and trying to throw money at whatever it is that they couldn't afford prior. So now we end up here and we're having this conversation.
Now that's history, is it not?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but yes, the standard has been that there have been recessions and downturns when the Fed has tried to reduce inflation.
Now, right now, the current inflation rate is 6.4%, and the current unemployment rate is 3.4%. Now, if history is right, I'm not asking you to again, blame anybody, but if history is right, unless you get some help, in order to get inflation down from 6.4% to, let's say, 4.4%, and the unemployment rate is going to have to rise to 7% based on history.
That's what the record would say.
Okay. and to get inflation down to 2.2% based on history, an immutable fact, unemployment would have to go to 10.6%. Would it not?
No, I wouldn't.
That's what the record shows. That's what the history shows.
Yeah, I don't think that kind of a number is at all in play here.
I know you're reluctant to admit it, and you don't want to get in the middle of a policy dispute. But I think it's undeniable. It's undeniable that the only way we're going to get this sticky inflation down is to attack it on the monetary side, which you're doing, and on the fiscal side, which means Congress has got to reduce the rate of growth of spending and reduce the rate of growth of debt accumulation. Now, I get that you don't want to get in the middle of that fight.
See, and he's pointing out the obvious, which is, yeah, we know you got to do something, but, Congress has to do something too. But no, you really got to do something, man. I know we got to do something, but you got to do something. And we probably won't do what we got to do, which will make your job harder. And I know you don't want to get in between that. He's going to have to get in between that. He's going to have to stop the printer and be like, look, listen, y'all either have to work with whatever money you have already, or you're gonna have to take some L's. Some people are going to have to take the L. And if it means that you don't get reelected, it means you don't get reelected. You're gonna have to take the L. Like, that's it. Take the L.
But the more we help on the fiscal side, the fewer people you're gonna have to put out of work. Isn't that a fact?
Please answer.
It could work out that way.
Sir?
It could work out that way.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Senator Reid of Rhode Island is recognized.
So basically he said, if we do our job, you think this could work out? And he's like, yeah, it could work out that way. If I do this and you guys do that, then yes, we don't have to damage as many Americans as would happen if I just had to continuously raise the rates.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Right? So, and I mean, we're talking about a rise of 10% possibly unemployment. Aiming at 7, but there's no real way to just turn off that machine once it gets going. There's no way to really stop unemployment from accumulating just in general once it begins, right? Because our economy is so intertwined, right? Different systems are intertwined that it would be almost impossible to just like stop it at a certain level. But like, okay, we're now at 7%. Everyone can stop firing everyone now. We've made it. We've made it off the ship. We're good now. Like, we've landed. The plane has landed. We no longer have to keep firing and throwing people overboard. It really just doesn't work like that because the economy is so intertwined. Regardless of the fact this capitalistic, socialistic, financial, political system is very intertwined. So what do I mean by that? I mean, there are many businesses work together, right? They communicate, they do business to business transactions. So when one business fails, it kind of creates either demand or a loss of demand for another business. How does that work? Well, for example, Amazon is a large business, but they heavily rely on logistics. But those logistics come from many different other companies and different resources. So the logistics themselves could be either planes, trains, automobiles, right? They need people to move the trains that are going cross country. They need people that fly planes that go cross country. They need delivery drivers that deliver door to door, all these things. So if Amazon is using FedEx, for example, and then people stop buying as many Amazon things, they stop their conspicuous consumption on Amazon. So now Amazon has less deliveries. Well, if Amazon has less deliveries, then FedEx has less deliveries. If FedEx has less deliveries, FedEx has less money. If FedEx has less money, then they need less drivers because they can't even afford all the drivers they already have. Plus, they already don't have as many packages. So now FedEx has to lay off 50,000 people because Amazon has 1 million less packages, right? And then it ripples like that. And then at the end of the line, which is our biggest fear, which is the major indicator of an economy collapse, is housing, right? So when all these FedEx workers lose their job and they can't find other work, right? Because at the end of the day, they have a skill in delivering packages. So now the FedEx worker tries to work for another shipping company, say DHL or UPS. The competition is fierce. It drives down their wage. And that's if there's even an opening for that position, because like we said, Amazon now has less packages. Amazon is not the only company that's shipping. Therefore, many people in the economy are, if they're pulling back, right, because inflation is so high, eggs are $12, they're pulling back from their conspicuous consumption. They're not buying, new phone cases or whatever, what have you. It's pulling back from all businesses. So now almost all businesses have less packages to ship. So UPS is still not shipping now more packages than FedEx all of a sudden. They're not. They're also shipping less packages. So it just becomes this ripple effect. Now, if that worker, that delivery man or woman can't deliver that package, right? They can't get a new job delivering. They have a mortgage that they can't pay, or they have a spouse, them and their spouse together already at the limit of their income, and they can't pay the mortgage. For 3 to 6 months, they lose their home. Where do they go from here? That's the question. That is the question. That's the issue that we have with unemployment, is that if unemployment is high and persistent, it literally ravages communities. And not to, beat a dead horse, but in most cases, people of color lose the most jobs. People of color suffer the most unemployment. At its average, people of color have an above average rate of unemployment. If unemployment is at 3.5%, Black unemployment is likely 2 percentages higher than the average. What brings that average down, though? White people. Let's call it what it is. If the unemployment rate is 3.5%, it's likely that white people's unemployment rate is much lower. And that's just how things have been for a long time. We can point out the obvious and say, well, part of that is because white people tend to be the largest group of employers. So it's very likely that they're hiring white people employees. So it just works out like that. Plus the numbers skew towards the fact that there are only about 40 million Black Americans. And there's, I think by now there's probably very close or more Hispanic Americans in the United States. So that also helps skew the numbers. But regardless, unemployment doesn't affect each racial community the same. When unemployment is rampant, it's even more rampant in the Black community and Hispanic communities than it is in the white communities. It's not the fact that white communities don't face unemployment as well. They face unemployment in high numbers as well, but on a percentage basis, it's not as high as Black communities, which really doesn't mean a whole lot if you want to step back and look at it completely objectively and say, well, 2% of this is still more than 3.5% of this. If you want to do it like that, you can. But we're going to get into the next part of the discussion with Elizabeth Warren. I'm a big proponent of Elizabeth Warren. I actually wanted her to be president, but unfortunately, she might be a little bit too radical for some people. But let's get right into that.
So the Fed has raised interest rates 8 times over the last year in what has been the most extreme rate hike cycle in 40 years. The Fed's goal is to slow inflation, and your tool, raising interest rates, is designed to slow the economy and throw people out of work. So far, you haven't tipped the economy into recession, but you haven't brought inflation entirely under control either. And maybe the reason for that is that other things are also keeping prices high, things you can't fix with high interest rates, things like price gouging and supply chain kinks and a war in Ukraine.
Yeah, so she's pointing out the things that Jerome can't control. Like, he can't control the fiscal policy of Congress. He can't really control the war in Ukraine. He can't control the businesses that are increasing prices due to inflation, even though their prices are already inflated. So basically gouging the consumer and making it harder for the consumer to afford the goods, products, services that they need, or maybe they just want them. Like, she's pointing all that stuff out because that's I think that's a big major component to this whole thing, is that, like, there's so many moving parts to this that Jerome Powell, or the Fed, let's call it the Fed, as one cog in the wheel, is, even if it does its job as it's supposed to, every other part still has to do their job, and if they don't, it still will fail. It'll still fail. Yeah.
But determined to continue to raise interest rates, so I want to take a look at where you're headed. In December, the Fed released its projections on the state of the economy under your monetary policy plan. According to the Fed's own report, if you continue raising interest rates as you plan, unemployment will be 4.6% by the end of the year, more than a full point higher than it is today.
4.6%, about 5% this year, people. 2023, we're talking about almost 5% unemployment rate, which probably in the Black community means more like 7%. But let's keep it pushing.
Chair Powell, if you hit your projections, do you know how many people who are currently working, going about their lives, will lose their jobs?
I don't have that number in front of me. I will say it's not
just
an
a math
intended
problem.
consequence. It's
Well,
not,
but it is, and it's in your report, and that would be about 2 million people who would lose.
So 2 million people, and I know recently you guys have seen like the massive wave of tech layoffs. That is nowhere near the amount of people that we're talking about at this point. Like, it's gonna be painful, people. Like, it's gonna be painful, and we're not going to be accustomed to this happening so quickly. And honestly, if we would have just had it happen and left it alone when we had our black swan, we would actually probably be in a better position today.
Their jobs, people who are working right now, making their mortgages. So, Chair Powell, if you could speak directly to the 2 million hardworking people who have decent jobs today, who you're planning to get fired over the next year, what would you say to them? How would you explain your view that they need to lose their jobs?
I would explain to people more broadly that inflation is extremely high and it's hurting the working people of this country badly. All of them, not just 2 million of them, but all of them are suffering under high inflation, and we are taking the only measures we have to bring inflation down.
And putting 2 million people out of work is just part of the cost, and they just have to bear it.
Well,
So they're not having the conversation the way a layman would have it, like myself, whereas I see it as it's not as simple as the words they're using. They're being very brief because each senator has only 5 minutes to talk to Jerome about it. So they're being very brief. But how can I put this where it makes sense? Okay, so inflation is high. So the person that's working, it costs them more for their everyday needs and expenses. So it's basically an additional tax on their income while they have the threat of losing their job. They already have to pay taxes. That tax is already used in governmental spending and social services. Now, when people lose their jobs, they rely heavily on social services. So what happens is the government now controls how much money a certain segment of the population has access to and can spend, which will stave off inflation. If you don't have access to a lot of money, you really can't buy a bunch of different things. You can only really buy what it is that you need because someone else is controlling your wallet, essentially. And what unemployment, to me, what it really means is we need to control 10% of the population's money as the government. That's my layman's term version of it. Like, that's what it looks like to me. And that's what it always looks like, because there's never been a time in history where there wasn't some unemployment. There wasn't a segment of the population that was unemployed, that wasn't unemployed. Now, granted, there was only one time in history for about 400 years where Black unemployment was 0, right? But that was only possible because they had $0 in wages, right? So that is the wage price balance that we're constantly having to deal with, and then inflation. But the wages have yet to follow actual inflation. Does that make sense? We're constantly battling with this battle, but we, as the workers, we've never quite ever won this battle, and we continuously go in the cycle, up and down, up and down. Some people learn, some people don't. Like, that's how it goes.
Will working people be better off if we just walk away from our jobs and inflation remains 5-6%?
Let me ask you about what happens if you do this. Since the end of World War II, there have been 12 times in which the unemployment rate has increased by 1 percentage point within 1 year. Exactly what you're aiming to do right now. How many of those times did the U.S. economy avoid falling into a recession?
You know, it's not as black and white as very
Just
very
looking at
infrequent.
the numbers.
She's basically saying there's never been a time when increase in unemployment did not lead to a recession. But that's what happens when a recession happens, is unemployment and a recession pretty much go hand in hand, because recession means a recessionary period where people are not spending as much money. The economy is kind of letting the air out. People aren't spending as much money. And unemployment is when people don't have any money to spend. like it goes hand in hand. You can't increase interest and decrease inflation and then not have an increase in unemployment and decrease in spending. It just doesn't work. They literally work hand in hand. The entire economy is so intertwined.
Actually, pretty black
Alan
and white.
Blinder's written a book on this, and
There have been 12 times that we've seen a 1 point increase in the unemployment rate in a year. That's exactly what your Fed report has put out as the projection and the plan based on how you're going to keep raising these interest rates. How many times did the economy fail to fall into a recession after doing that? Out of 12 times.
I think the number is 0.
I think the number is 0. That's exactly right.
0
so
times.
Then the question becomes, we've got 2 million people out of work. Can you stop it at 2 million people? History suggests that
This is what I was talking about before. You really cannot just be like, okay, well, now 2 million people are fired. Great, let's stop firing people. It doesn't work like that. It's too intertwined to just somehow stop a runaway unemployment. The only other option is to let inflation run away, which is why he said, okay, so should we stop just doing our jobs and let inflation go 5-6%? Yeah, because those are the only two options. Either we let inflation continue, or we allow unemployment to increase. That is, one or the other has to, win the battle. And part of his job is to create a balance. And granted, this is what's really happening. It's like, this is what's really happening. Okay, we have unemployment, and then we have inflation and interest rates, right? So this is what's happening. You notice something? As each thing keeps going up and down, up and down, up and down, at the end of the day, the bottom, the money printing is still keeping everything rising. So all you could do is just make sure that this doesn't happen. Right? You don't want this. You just want this. You know? You don't want this, and then this is stagnated, and you don't want this either, right? Because now we're getting paid to print money. Yeah.
Fed a terrible track record of containing modest increases in the unemployment rate. Once the economy starts shedding jobs, it's kind of like a runaway train. It is really hard to stop. In fact, in 11 out of the 12 times that the
actually the only way you could actually stop the unemployment rate, let's get into that, is if you lower that interest rate. So that's why this happens, right? So the interest rates get higher, unemployment increases, and then you try to lower the interest rate, then unemployment decreases. But if you're printing money at the same time, all that stuff just keeps going like this, right? It just, that's what really happens. So the only way to actually lower the unemployment rate is to lower inflation and let businesses take out loans so that so people can create new businesses. Because not all businesses are large corporations. A lot of mom and pop, most businesses are smaller businesses that employ, 5 to 10 employees, sometimes 20 to 30 employees. Those businesses also exist. People want to create those businesses. But it's very hard to do those things when the interest rate is high, because the risk increases and the banks know the risk has increased. So they're way more stringent on who they lend to. And that exposes itself in many different ways. We're gonna have to get into it.
Unemployment rate increased by a full percentage point within 1 year. Unemployment went on to rise another full percentage point on top of that. If that's what happens this time, we'd be looking at least 3.5 million people who would lose their jobs. So, Chair Powell, if you reach your goal and 2 million people get laid off by the end of this year, and then, just like in 11 out of 12 times that unemployment has risen by a point in a single year, it keeps on rising. And then we've got 2.5 million people out of work. We've got 3 million people who get laid off. We've got 3.5 million people who get laid off. What's your plan?
Well, right now the unemployment rate is 3.4%, which is the lowest in 54 years. And we actually don't think that we need to see a sharp or enormous increase in unemployment to get inflation under control.
I'm looking at your projections. Do you call laying off 2 million people this year not a sharp increase in unemployment?
I would say 4.5%.
Explain that to the 2 million families who are going to be out of work.
They're trying to blame it on him and make it seem like, well, it's your fault that they're going to be unemployed once you raise these interest rates, when it's like, not really. It's still down to the businesses if they decide that they're going to lay off people. We saw Microsoft lay off thousands of employees, but Microsoft has billions of dollars. They can actually afford to keep paying those employees for years to come if they never made another dollar, right? So I understand from Jerome Powell's point. He's like, I'm not the one doing this layoff. I'm just increasing rates so that people stop borrowing money, especially you, Congress. I really need you to stop borrowing money, but we're not going to talk about that, are we? And then Elizabeth is kind of just like, well, don't you gotta do this? You've seen what happens when interest rates rise an entire percentage point in less than a year. All these layoffs. What are you going to tell 2 million people? Well, Jerome is not going to tell them anything. He's telling everyone all at once, we need to increase interest rates to stave off inflation. Your options as a working class person, a consumer, is either you stop spending, save your money, and we can work on inflation that way. I'll increase interest rates. Businesses and the government can't spend as much money, and then I will somehow work on inflation. And that's how we have to figure it out. But we can't have our cake and eat it too.
we're not targeting any of that, but I would say even 4.5% unemployment is well better than most of the time for the last 75 years.
In other words, you don't have a plan to stop a runaway train if it occurs. Chair Powell, you are gambling with people's lives, and there's a pile of data showing that price gouging and supply chain kinks and the war in Ukraine are driving up prices.
Those are all out of his control. Those are business ideas, and that's the government idea of war. He can't control that. The Federal Reserve controls how much money costs to print. That's it. Like, people gotta stop making it seem like he has anything to do with the price gouging. He doesn't control price gouging. He only controls the interest rates, right?
You cling to the idea that there's only one solution: lay off millions of workers. We need a Fed that will fight for families. And if you're not going to lead that charge, we need someone at the Fed who will.
I mean, in a sense, he is trying to fight for families. He's saying, hey, the best we can do is increase these interest rates. We understand that the end result might be about 2 million people unemployed, but that's better than the alternative, which is no one's unemployed, but everything is unaffordable. Like, everything is so inflated, no one can afford anything. That's what we're gonna end up like Venezuela or something. Because if money is still cheap and we're still printing money, and the companies can jack up their prices because the money printers are on, and Congress has no time to stop creating more stimulus into the economy, then we're just never gonna stop increasing prices or slow the increase in prices, because we never actually stop increasing prices. That's part of the capitalist system. As long as we print money, prices will increase. But we can slow the rate of inflation. But the only way to do that, as far as Jerome Powell's bag of tricks, is to increase interest rates. That can have a ripple effect in creating unemployment, but he does not control whether or not these businesses decide to let go of workers. That's the end all be all. We're all people here. We're all human beings. We all have different roles in society. That's just how the cookie crumbles. I know some people view like the Fed chair and senators and Congress as like these different type of beings, but they're still human beings at the end of the day. They're just doing their job, their role, and none of them want to lose their jobs. They're actually a lot less likely to lose their jobs. But I don't think anyone actually wants people to not have jobs, especially not in a capitalist society. The capitalist wants people to have money to spend at the end of the day. They definitely don't want unemployment. They want to grow their business. They want to do this. They want to do that. But it's up to the Fed to decide, hey, we understand that you want to grow your business, you want to increase profits, you want to do this, but the cost of money is going to be higher. It was at 2% at one point. That's cool, but that is cheap money. And you have so much cheap money, everyone is going to want to grab the cheap money up, right? And that's going to cause a lot of inflation. So, this was fun. I just want to thank y'all for watching. I hope y'all, want to join in and comment on the conversation. This was a longer video than usual, but thank you guys for watching. It is The Drunk Capitalist. I'll see you guys next time. Peace. Hopefully there's better news next time. Hopefully there is a rabbit in his bag of tricks and that he can pull out and fix this whole thing. Someone grab a magic wand and fix our whole problem, because things are about to get dark around here if we don't fix these problems that we have that are in our economy at the moment. Yeah, we have some more things to talk about though. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.